is calling you. The universe is calling me. It speaks both day and night. It's full of dark and light.
Hello and welcome to SkyTour Radio here on KGRAradio.com. I'm your host, Mark D'Antonio, here with my most incredible and wonderful co-host, Amanda Curran. Hello, Amanda.
Hi, Mark. Hey, Al.
And we both want to welcome you, all the KGRA family, to our broadcast. Few announcements. SkyTour Livestream, our companion site on YouTube, has 2 new videos. One is the SkyTour Livestream's Science of the Universe, which celebrates 8 months of the SkyTour Livestream with all the imagery taken from the observatory. And we view deep sky objects in seconds, not minutes, and show them all to you, and then we learn all about them. It's fantastic. And the next is SkyTour News for February 18th, courtesy of Amanda, our own co-host here. She did a fine job on that, so please check those out. Make sure you subscribe to SkyTour Livestream and YouTube if you don't and haven't done yet, and make sure you click the bell to get notified when any events are happening, be it another SkyTour News or another SkyTour Livestream that's starting up. Now, on a note here, our live streams were erroneously halted for a couple more weeks to come by YouTube. But since there's absolutely no one to talk to at YouTube and no one to help you, we have no choice but to wait or find another streaming service. But technically, we should be back online March 20th, it says. And I think it was just a robot, a bot came through and said, oh, I don't like your video, which was 11 seconds long, had no content and no sound. But for some reason, that video was considered inappropriate content. Go figure. And there's no one you can talk to. So let that be a lesson to you folks who think about YouTube. Maybe you don't want to think so much about YouTube moving forward, because every company has customer service. YouTube doesn't. And just doesn't work for me. But, if we get it back, we'll go back to it until we can find another replacement. But anyway, moving forward. Now, make sure you visit our online store at fxmodels.com or at the FX Models Planetary Replicas page on Facebook to purchase Moon, Mars, and Pluto swag craters. And if the KGRA listeners enter that nice code that we have here, ST15, during the checkout, you will get a $15 discount, ST15. Links are on the SkyTour Radio show page at kgraradio.com. And we have so many dedicated KGRA listeners. We've been hearing from them all over the place. And I just want to give a shout out to in particular, Dan and Ren. Are you listening down in Florida? I bet you are. I can see their smiles as it is. Now, Ren is the one who actually wrote our introductory song, and she's a fantastic artist. So make sure you listen to that song, and you can contact us here to find out how to contact her. So tonight, I want to just say one last thing, and that is, welcome to this commercial-free SkyTour Radio live show. That's right, commercial-free. It's a little coup that our producer pulled off, so if anything goes wrong or if anyone is going to get in trouble, it's going to be him and not us. And he's smiling right now and laughing and shaking his head. Tonight on SkyTour Radio, we're going to do something called the Astronomical Exoplanet Potpourri. Well, what's that? Well, there's a number of astronomical findings that are out there now that you can read about that are related to exoplanets. And to lead this in, I want to share with you a little story. Okay, it's story time. We should have a little song for that. Ding, 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 that leads into the story time here. But when
Everyone loves story time.
Well, it's fun, In my university days, when I was getting my degree in astronomy, I was working on something called the parallax program. Now, parallax is something some of you understand, maybe some of you don't. But what parallax is a way to measure the distance to nearby stars. So what is it actually? Well, it's defined as the apparent movement of a distant object when viewed from different positions. Now, that doesn't really help you much. But to see parallax in action, all you have to do is extend your arm out to full length, hold up your index finger, and while looking at a distant wall or whatever, just blink your left and right eye and watch how your index finger that's sticking up appears to shift against the background wall. That little thing that I've now just got tons of people all over the country and world doing right now, okay, is a way to actually see parallax in action. Now, the left eye blinks and the right eye blinks, and the distance between your eyes is a few inches, okay, just a couple inches. Well, the real parallax that we use, astronomical parallax, is calculated by using the actual orbit of the Earth. So at one side of the Earth's orbit, we look, and that's like, say, with our left eye open and our right eye closed. Then on the other side of their orbit, basically it's opening our right eye and closing our left eye. And we take measurements of the same star against the background stars. And this gives us the very, very accurate angle between the distances, and that's basically 93 million miles times 2, okay? So it's that's how big across that is. That's a big baseline, so to speak. And that will give us the distance with what's called the parallax angle. Now, this works to about 300 light years or so, a little over 300 light years. And beyond that, it's not really accurate. But I was working in the program to actually measure a lot of these nearby stars. And one day, the head of our department was in his office with a bunch of other people. And I was discussing with him that we can't be alone. I don't see how we can be alone. Basically, I felt like just by looking at our own Earth, it convinced me that there had to be life in other places. And he would look at me and he'd go, why, Mr. D'Antonio? And I said, it's very simple. To me, when I look at all the life forms on our planet, all right, and I used to call it, I said of our planet, I said, our planet is populated with life forms. I think the universe is populated with life. I said, it's a populated universe. And ironically, that was a favorite phrase of mine. And that became the title of my book, which I just finished. And then we'll talk about that at a future show. But I argued that if you look at all the life forms on this planet, all of the upper life forms anyway, have symmetry of some kind. 2 legs on one, two legs forward, 2 legs back, 2 eyes, a brain that's divided, symmetry across the center. That's called bilateral symmetry. Now, that is a template that was provided by the mechanism through which life was created on this planet. Now, we had the building blocks of life delivered to this planet by meteors, comets, and the Earth itself even built these. Those are called amino acids. And many of those amino acids are made automatically on this planet and were delivered, like I said. So clearly it relates to this approach, or this type of genesis for this planet and how we were created by the universe. Now, as far as that, now I was talking to the head of the department like this. I was telling him these things. I said, it's a template that was created by the universe and given to us, and now all the life forms show this. And I even said to him, this is why we don't have pogo stick cows, bouncing around like moo, boing, 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 because, no single-legged type things, all right? Everything has symmetry. And I said, there's a reason for that. And I think it has to do with the manner in which these carbon-based life sprung up on this planet. And he just sat there and stared at me, and the other folks were looking at him because they didn't know how to react until he could react to me. And he looked at me and he said, Mark, get back in the observatory and leave Captain Kirk to us. I was like, ugh. But you know what? To his credit, that was the 1980s. When I got my degree, it was 83. And we hadn't found a single planet around another star at that point. Now, there are many false positives throughout the years. In fact, the parallax program induced a bunch of false positives itself because of the nature of trying to measure the movement of the star from one side of the Earth's orbit to the other. Really cool stuff. But in the end, we didn't have a leg to stand on. Okay, 2 legs, actually, because we're symmetric. We didn't have legs to stand on until the first exoplanet really was confirmed. And that was suspected in the late 80s, confirmed in the early 90s. And the thing is, that's when a bunch of programs on exoplanets began to really bloom. And that's when the search was on. And we were off. Now, that was sort of in the 80s. Now, their telescopes on the ground are pretty bad at seeing, the evidence of planets around other stars, but we have gotten pretty good at it. There's a 3.5 meter telescope at Peak National Observatory at the NOAO, which is the National Optical Astronomy Observatory. Okay, has a ground-based program for finding planets. Then there's the TRAPPIST telescope, TRAPPIST is actually an acronym. It stands for Transiting Planet and Planetesimal Small Telescope, and that's in Chile. Now, you've heard of TRAPPIST probably because you know of a star that was in its program called TRAPPIST-1, and we're going to talk about TRAPPIST-1 shortly. But if you're also interested in trying to do something yourself, you know what? There's no reason that you, right now, can't go figure this out. You don't have to have a telescope to go looking for exoplanets. You don't have to be a scientist with an astronomy degree to go, look for exoplanets. No, not at all. You can go to planethunters.org, which is part of the Zooniverse franchise, ZOONIVERSE, Zooniverse, and it's planethunters.org. And you can begin looking at light curves that come from the Kepler Space Telescope. And you can decide if you think you see an exoplanet. There's so much data to wade through. That data you're looking at is potentially, in fact, very likely data that no one has yet seen. So when it comes up on your screen, that might be the first time it's ever been seen. So you could be finding an exoplanet. In fact, there's already been a number of discoveries this month. There actually, ordinary folks like yourselves went out there and found exoplanets already. Right now, it's planethunters.org. Check it out. I'm a member. You don't have to you don't pay to be in it. It's just, you can go there and just do it without even giving your name. It's the greatest thing. But you
get to name it if you find it?
That's the thing, No, you don't get to name it because none of the planets actually get names other than the classification they give them, which I'll talk about in a little while when we go into some of these. But there's some specific standard nomenclature, names basically that we give to the planets that we find around other stars. But I just think that these programs are cool, and here's why. Using the crowdsourcing methodology, ordinary people that aren't scientists and aren't astronomers can make significant contributions to science now. Isn't that incredible? I mean, that's cool. I mean, Amanda, you could go, like right now, you could be totally sidetracked looking at light curves on planethunters.org while being a co-host on this show. Wouldn't that be fun?
I did put the link in chat for all those interested, and I think it's amazing that anyone can do it. Like you're saying, you don't have to have any kind of degree or know the right people. Like, this is free for anyone to use, and if we have enough eyes up there, who knows?
Well, that's the whole idea. Get more eyes on the subject. Get more eyes on the problem. And that works. It works very well. So, that said, just check it out, planethunters.org. But if you are confined to the planet, this is one of the ways we do it. We do it either with this or the telescopes I mentioned. There's other telescope projects on Mauna Kea out in Hawaii, where the projects looking for planets are situated. The Gemini telescope out there. I talked to the director of that at one point, and used some of their imagery for my talks around the country. But if we're talking about spaceborne stuff now, stuff up in space, well, many people are familiar with the Kepler Space Telescope. Kepler was launched in March of 2009, and it's been cranking, right? But then it had an accident, a little bit of an accident, which I'll talk about shortly, and it was crippled for a while. And I say for a while because now it's called K2. And there is a reason, because it's actually been brought back to life, and I'll tell you how. The other spaceborne, this one's underway. In fact, this was just delivered to NASA. It's called the TESS satellite. It's TESS, TESS, Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite. I did a project for the company that's actually tasked with launching TESS into space. And so the CEO of that company and I spent some time talking. And he's very excited about launching TESS, and he's very excited about the prospects for what TESS can show us. Then, along with TESS, and TESS will launch, okay? What's up there already is the Spitzer infrared satellite. Now, you have to wonder, when you look at a star at a great distance, if it has dust around it or planets, they may show up as warm spots in the imagery because infrared energy, of course, is heat, and that is something this telescope in space is very well suited to look at and view. So that's pretty cool. And so the Spitzer has made some discoveries, and we'll talk about them in a couple minutes. Then there's the James Webb Space Telescope, the JWST. The James Webb's going to go up next year. And the thing about the James Webb is, okay, it's literally several times larger than the Hubble Space Telescope in size. Okay, the Hubble's mirror is around 8 feet, and this one's around 21, I think. And this means it's going to have a lot of light gathering power, and it's going to actually be able to see the atmospheres of the exoplanets. Now, I don't know if that means anything to anyone yet, because we don't really have a good feel, I think, for the scale of the universe. And I got a little cool way to show you that in a sec. But the James Webb Telescope is going to be able to see methane, oxygen, carbon dioxide in the atmospheres of a planet. What are those? Well, those are basically, gases that we know are, evidence of life. All right. When it was a few years ago when during the Martian summer we saw a bloom of methane appear out of nowhere around the temperate climate on Mars, and that methane bloom was odd because there's no volcanic activity, and methane is associated with volcanic activity or life. So is it possible that microbial life on Mars bloomed and caused this to happen? Don't forget when the Gulf Stream or the Gulf was poisoned by the BP well blowout years ago. There were methane-eating bacteria that suddenly came out of nowhere and just bloomed into these massive billions upon trillions, in fact, of little tiny bacteria that just sprung to life, ate all the methane, and then disappeared over time as they died away. Okay, so could it be that there was a bloom for a different reason on Mars, maybe because of the heat, the extra heating for the Martian summer? I don't know. So
Are there such thing as Mars quakes?
Well, that's the other thing. Okay, see, Mars, like the Earth, is got tectonic plates. And that is, there's those zones like in California. People are familiar with the San Andreas Fault. We have fault lines and fault zones. We have areas where the Earth is sliding, across itself and back and forth and butting up against itself, building mountains. On Mars, there's no such thing because Mars doesn't have a tectonic plate system. Right? It's pretty much dead. But are there Mars quakes? Well, yeah, there's occasional quakes that might occur on Mars for different reasons, but not because there's stress from crustal plates pumping into each other. That doesn't happen on Mars. It only happens. We only see it here and on Venus, Io, Enceladus, Europa, and it's not associated with heat either. Sometimes it's just associated with movement of plates. Even Pluto has evidence of this type of action, going on, but it's not necessarily tectonic activity. It could just be localized crustal activity. But in any case, because of this, because of all these things, all right, we are trying to figure out the areas that might be able to harbor life, and that's just in our solar system. Extend this type of knowledge out to the new planets we're finding around other stars, you see, and this is invaluable information. This is very, very important. So when we look at another star and we see a planet that's, in the habitable zone, that not too cold, not too hot, like the Three Bears, location for the planet, that means that the planet would be in that nice moderate temperature zone, kind of like where the Earth is around our sun. And that habitable zone will vary depending on the star. Okay, we're going to see that shortly. Okay, if the star puts out less output, the habitable zone is going to be closer to the star. If it's massively bigger than the sun and has a lot of output, a lot of energy output, then that habitable zone is going to be a lot farther from the sun. And interesting to see how that plays out. So, and speaking of that, why don't we just let's pick on a known exoplanet system, actually. And let's do what I'm calling the TRAPPIST-1 update. Now, originally, TRAPPIST, from the TRAPPIST telescope, TRAPPIST-1 was found, and the TRAPPIST telescope, along with the Spitzer infrared telescope, and several other ground-based telescopes found a total of 7 planets around a star 40 light years away. And so that star was TRAPPIST-1. But the star is a very interesting star. The star is actually what they call an ultra-cool dwarf. And that's also like, yeah, wow, neato, man. But it's also very cool, but it's also cool in temperature. And this means that the star obviously isn't anything like the sun. It's literally slightly larger than Jupiter. All right. Now, Jupiter would have to be about 80 times as massive to be a star, so to speak. And even then, it's still a question as to whether it will actually be a star or maybe border on something called a brown dwarf. But the TRAPPIST-1 star is literally 9% of the size of our sun. 9%. Okay, not even 10%, 9%, less than 10%. Now, it has these 7 planets around it, and these planets are more or less the size of the Earth. So this was a very interesting find. We're very excited about this. And the thing about this set of planets around this star is that every single one of these planets, every single one of them, is closer to the star than Mercury is to our sun. It's like a mini solar system, but it's almost like Jupiter and its moons rather than the sun and its planets. So this was a very, very interesting finding, and then upon looking at the data even more, we figured out that, these planets are very close to each other, for one thing, and for another, these planets are also so close to the star that most likely the same side of the planet faces the star in the same way and for the same type of reasons that one side of the moon always faces us. Now, when people say, the moon doesn't rotate and it doesn't go around in its orbit, actually it does. It does rotate on its axis, actually, but it takes it one time around the Earth to do so. That's called a resonance type thing, where it actually, that's a tidal locking is the actual name. Where the moon's forces between the Earth and the moon are such that the gravity between the two of these objects keeps the same face of the moon toward us. All right, and the moon's a little bit oblong, so it does have a little bit of a skew toward us in that regard. But nevertheless, we see the same face of the moon. Now, if we were the TRAPPIST-1 star and the moon was like one of its closest planets, well, then we'd see what the star would see, the same face. Now, the planets...
actually, hold on. Kathy has a good question about this.
Yeah.
She wants to know how astronomers can guess what the TRAPPIST planets look like. That's a really good question.
Well, see, there's a lot of things, okay, that and to answer that question requires me having to page down a little bit to get to how we actually do that, and I'm going to discuss that. But that's a great question, and Kathy, I'd love to answer that right now, but this is not the right place to throw that. I mean, in short, we know based on what's called the light curve, right? The way the planet crossing in front of the star dims out the starlight just a little bit. Right? We know that, and if we count 7 different times that happens, well, then we have 7 different planets in the end if we do the confirmation right. But we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. But that's a great question, Kathy. Thank you. Now, one of the things that we didn't know about this star, and we still technically don't, is whether any of them have an atmosphere. Now, we want to talk about the nomenclature a little bit. When we have a star like TRAPPIST-1, all right, that star has its name, okay, and any planets around that star have a small letter that is given to them as a designation. Amanda, you said, I'd love to name them. Could we name them? I wish we could. I wish we could have, we could say, one of these planets is this is planet D'Antonio, this is planet Amanda, or whatever. But we don't have that luxury. So the way they name the planets is with a single letter, and it starts pretty much most of the time with the letter B. All right, so the closest is B, the next farthest out is C, D, E, E, F, G, H, all the way out. So TRAPPIST-1 has B through H, okay? And of those, we're looking at planets D, E, and F, which are kind of, how do you say this? The planets are way within the orbit of Mercury around our sun, but then again, the star is so much smaller. And when I mentioned the habitable zone of those smaller stars is much closer to the star. Well, around stars like this, the habitable zone is so close that the planets themselves are tidally locked, like the moon is to the Earth, with the star. So the same face of the planet always faces the star. And you might say, whoa, that makes for a real long day. Well, the truth is, the closest planets go around in 2 or 3 days, and the farthest one goes around in about 14 days. What's that mean? Orbits the star in that amount of time. Now, we orbit the star in 365 days, and that's our year, isn't it? Well, the TRAPPIST-1 planets don't have a year that's more than 12 to 14 days long. That's pretty incredible. If you're going to say, I'm going to go to TRAPPIST-1F for a year, you'll go there and be back in 7 days. Okay? Well, because, a year there is different from a year here. And it has nothing to do with time moving faster or anything like that. It's just how long it takes that planet to go around the star. That's how we define what we call a year. So the thing is now, when we look at these planets, we need to know some facts. We need to know whether there's an atmosphere, for one thing. We also need to know if there's water, right? Because water is essential for life like us. And I always qualify that. Looking for life like us, we need to have water. So the Hubble Space Telescope did a new study of TRAPPIST-1. And this new study started to look for atmospheres, all right? And it turns out that the Hubble Space Telescope was actually able to discern whether these planets had an atmosphere or not. And here's the results, okay? For the planets B and C and D, or B and C, which are closest to the star, they probably are just rocky, like Mercury is rocky, no atmosphere, all right? But for planets D, E, and F, a little farther away from the star, they found that, what Hubble could look for was these big, thick, puffy atmospheres that are like, say, intrinsic to a planet like Jupiter and Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, big gas giants. It can detect a lot of thick hydrogen atmosphere, all right? And that's something that the Hubble could do. It couldn't actually detect what's in the atmosphere, but it could just say it doesn't have hydrogen or it does have hydrogen. Okay, so it's really crude. But D, E, and F do not, from this study, contain a large, thick hydrogen atmosphere. So they aren't a Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. All right, that means they may, you can't discern this yet, may contain a shallower atmosphere. Our atmosphere is a shallow atmosphere, by the way. And it could also have oxygen, perhaps. So in other words, the Hubble study did not rule out the possibility that D, E, and F, which are in the habitable zone for this star, mind you, don't have a potentially habitable atmosphere. So that's just the coolest thing. Now, G and H are the two farther ones out. We had B and C with no atmosphere. D, E, and F, next 3 out, in the habitable zone. 3 planets in the habitable zone for this star. That's cool. All right, with E kind of forming the crux of this whole issue because it has the best placement. And then G and H on the outside may have thicker atmospheres. All right. So the thing that's interesting is that these planetary results favor an atmosphere like our own. That's the result of the Hubble study. So we're getting there, guys. We're getting there. We're going to be able to figure this out someday. Man, I'm just pumped because it's like we're going to find a way. We're going to find a way, and we're going to be able to do this someday. We're going to be able to say this, that this planet has an atmosphere and it's composed of this, this, and this. How soon? Maybe as early as 2019 when the James Webb Telescope goes up, because its powerful infrared systems are going to be able to detect the signatures of all of these. And I think that's really great. So now, just to keep in mind when we're talking about these planet finding routines and planet finding satellites, many of us are familiar with the Kepler Space Telescope, okay, and we now know about the TRAPPIST telescope. There's a lot of other ground-based and Spitzer up in space looking for planets and then the James Webb will be up there next year. Well, in the end, what we're going to find is that there's a lifetime that is assigned to any of these satellites that's up there. Space is hostile. Space hurts things. Space will destroy your systems. Okay. Now, the Kepler mission, as I said, had some issues arise, and it migrated to a new mission. They call it the K2, and they've added 100 planets onto the previously found 3,600 known and confirmed planets. That's right, 3,600. Now you may say, well, where are they looking? Well, if you hold your arm out at full length and make a fist, it's the size of the sky that's the size of your fist. And it's in the summertime sky in August, directly over your head in the constellation of Cygnus, the swan. All right. And this is where we have found all the planets we've looked for, because that's where the Kepler was looking. All right. And of those, let's talk about what we found. Now, they range from, small rocky planets like the Earth to Jupiter-sized and larger. Initially, all we could find were these Jupiter-sized, these Jovian, they're called, Jovian moons, because they're big and they're puffy and they can actually be seen. And we'll talk about how this all works in a bit. But keep in mind that as the techniques improved, we were able to take the telescope data and discern smaller, both from artificial intelligence routines and from different techniques used to analyze the data. Now, in terms, as of May of 2016, all right, we found about 200 Earth-sized planets among those 100,000. Now, let's extrapolate, okay? The galaxy has between 100 and 400 billion stars, all right? Therefore, for every million stars, that means that if there's 100,000 stars that the Keplers looked at, and within that they found 200 Earth-sized planets, that means that for every million stars, that number goes up by 10, and it goes up to 2,000 by multiple of 10, and goes up to 2,000 Earth-like stars for every million. I'm sorry, Earth-like planets for every million stars. Now, for every billion stars, that means there's 2 million Earth-sized planets. So, taking us to the next step, at the low end, for the estimate of the stars in our galaxy, that is 100 billion stars, all right? That means there's 200 million Earth-sized planets. And at the high end of 400 billion stars, that means there's 400 million Earth-sized planets. And that's by the data. But there's another requirement. The other requirement is that planets have to be in a habitable zone. Again, that not too hot, not too cold. Why? Well, because for life like us now, we need standing water, liquid H2O. And the only way we know that liquid water can be in existence is if the temperature and the pressure are such that there's a thick enough atmosphere and the temperature is low enough so that water can rain out of the sky and collect in pools and stay there. It doesn't happen on Venus. Venus lost its water through means during its formation because it was closer to the sun. And Mars, its water is all locked up in ice because it's too cold, right? And then the atmosphere is too thin. But if we talk about the habitable zone now, with planets having to be in a habitable zone, that changes our number. So when we say 400 million Earth-sized planets, well, of the planets that are in the Kepler survey program stars, which were the 100,000 we talked about, 50 of those, 50 of those planets are Earth-sized and in the habitable zone. Both of those conditions are met. So that means 50 in the Kepler study. Now, let's extrapolate this again. That means for 1 million stars, there's 500 Earth-like habitables, as we'll call them. For 1 billion stars, there's 500,000 Earth-like habitables. And then the numbers we really want. For 100 billion stars, it means there might be 50 million Earths out there. Okay, at the low end estimate for how many stars are in our galaxy. At the high end estimate for how many stars are in our galaxy, 400 billion. All right, with 400 billion stars in our galaxy, that raises the number to 200 million Earth-like habitable planets in this galaxy alone. And that's a fairly reasonable number. The actual number will probably be something in between the 50 million at 100 billion stars and 200 million and 400 billion stars. So it's somewhere in the middle. Let's say 120 million Earths within our galaxy. Now let's keep in mind there's at least 2 trillion galaxies. And now you see your head just goes boof, and then and just explodes. So you see, and then there's other estimates too, by the way, that say that up to 10% of the stars have Earth-like planets. All right, so we're not saying that the information I'm giving you is going to be the only answer, because we looked in one section of the universe, one section of the galaxy, and found these were the numbers. Well, that's going to vary. That's going to vary depending on where you look. That's not even looking toward the center of the galaxy, where the density of the stars is thousands of times higher. So we could actually be seeing just the tip of the iceberg here. This is incredible. So, but to understand that the Kepler Space Telescope, and to understand that amazing feat that it's been pulling off since 2009, let's talk about a little bit about how it works. The Kepler Space Telescope, sitting out in space, is watching these 100,000 stars, and it's looking for something called a transit. What's that? Well, that's where the planets that we're looking for may be passing between the star and our Earth, as we're seeing it from here. And if that planet does pass in front of the starlight is going to be knocked down just a little bit. It's going to be dimmed a slight amount as that planet makes its way across the face of the star as seen from Earth. And that's what we look for. We're looking for this dim light. Now, the shape of that light curve, as it's called, tells us stuff. The speed at which it occurs tells us stuff. And the depth that it goes to, the actual depth that the light curve appears in the starlight, tells us a lot of things. So you might say, well, wow, so couldn't there be a lot more planets that we're just missing? Yeah, there are, because we know there are, because that's only for planets that happen to be passing right in front of their star as seen from here. But what about solar systems or stellar systems where the whole plane of their solar system or their star system is actually in a little bit of an angle, so that as those planets go around their star, they don't ever pass in front of the star as seen from here? There's certainly billions of those too. So you see, the numbers, this is just such a little stab in the dark that we're taking here with Kepler, but it's a start, and that's the important thing, okay? So when it sees a transit, when it sees the light curve and the little dimming of the starlight, well, maybe that's a planet, but maybe it's not. One of the problems we have is that if it's a planet, then the time it takes for that planet to go around that star and come back through, we should see another identical curve at some time in the future. And depending on how long that is, that tells us, if it's a planet, that tells us the period or the orbital time it takes for that planet to go around the star. Okay? And if it takes a longer time, well, then we have to be constrained to waiting for a long time to be able to see. For instance, if we were looking for another Earth circling a star out there at, say, 93 million miles, which is the one astronomical unit distance that is the Earth distance from the sun, then we would have to wait for 365 days for the next data point. So you see, the universe moves at the speed of slow sometimes, and we just have to be patient. And 100 years from now, this patience will be fully rewarded, I know. But if we see that spot or that little dip in the light curve, and then we don't see it again, what could that mean? We've seen that happen, where we see a promising candidate, and then we don't see it again. Now, how do we know that approximately when it will come back? Well, we know because the starlight gets dimmed for a certain amount of time as the planet is crossing the face. the speed of the planet moving across that face is determined by its distance from the star and how fast it goes in its orbit. So we can calculate how fast that planet's moving in its orbit, and thus predict when we should see the next light dimming the next time around.
Is that what we were doing with Tabby Star?
No, Tabby Star was a little bit different. Tabby Star, we still don't have any answers to. There's no pattern to Tabby Star at all.
But that's what we're looking for it to pass again in a certain amount of time to determine, wasn't that?
Well, that's obviously we have to look for that. Now there's people don't know what Tabby Star is, and I have to tell them. Tabby Star, Tabitha Boyajian is an astronomer who found a star whose starlight was inexplicably dimming, and it was dimming up to 20% at times, and that's unheard of for a starlight. And there's no amount of planets around the star that could cause the starlight to dim by that much. So people were perplexed for a long time with this, and Tabby was herself perplexed. She didn't know what this could mean, and I totally see it. I can totally understand it. They still don't. They had all kinds of theories as to what could be the case, why the star was dimming, and they didn't actually reach a conclusion at this point. So we still don't know. But we're working on it. I mean, they're working on it. I'm not working on that, but they are. But the thing that's important to understand, I think, is that when we see the light dimming at a star, we initially want to see if it's a planet. So we have to try and classify this light curve. We try to figure out what it's doing, and whether it's moving at a certain speed, and if it's something that will come back. If we don't see it come back, then it means it was something called a transient event. And what is that? A transient event is something called potentially a sunspot. When many of the listeners were kids, they probably had a telescope perhaps, and they projected sunspots on a white card, and maybe they did it with a school. And so when you see these sunspots, those actually will look like a planet, because they will also detract from the light of a star and cause the star to dim. But, all right, these are transient objects. When the star spins around and comes back again, that may not be there, or it might be bigger, or it might be very small, or it might not be there at all anymore. So basically, this is the kind of thing that we want to rule out. We don't want to be a sunspot. We want it to be a planet. So if we see this repeated return, and this is why, by the way, we know of many planets that are very close to their star. We can't tell, we get a light curve change for a planet that's far away from its star, and that light curve for the star is going to be, in place for, say, perhaps, months, because the planet's moving so slowly because it's so far away from the star. But unfortunately, the farther away from the star a planet is, it's no guarantee that it's going to pass in front of the star as seen from here, whereas closer to the star, that might actually be more true. And that has to do with the fact that not all the orbits are totally aligned with each other. It's not a perfectly flat plane. Pluto's at a higher inclination, for instance, to the solar system. But for the most part, they're pretty much in a plane. So we look for that. But we've only been successful, or have been in the past, with these very, very massive planets. But now, with these additional techniques and additional instruments coming online, like the James Webb, we're going to be able to see a lot smaller planets, even so. And now Kepler is being basically retasked, because when you look at an object that's so far away, you can't even see the star as a disk in the sky. Okay, stars are ever only points of light, and that's pretty impressive when you think that, wow, a little tiny point of light, and we can detect something 10 to 50 times smaller than the star crossing in front of it. That's impressive. All right, so the Kepler Space Telescope could measure the minutest changes in light, and that's how it did it. Now, just to show you how big a star is, the diameter of a star, if we were to take our nearest star to us, not the sun, that is the nearest star, but the next one out, okay, the Alpha Centauri star system. Okay, there's 3 stars there. there's the A component, the B component, and then Proxima, which is C. And that little C, Proxima, is the closest one to us. But let's take A, right? Let's take A. It's a star kind of like the sun. Okay, to see that star as a disk, right? We don't have any telescope on this planet that can see that star as a disk. None at all. And the reason is because it's at 4.3 light years. That's the closest thing to us, but it's still too small for anything we have to see. Well, to illustrate the problem, if you have a U.S. quarter of a coin, a U.S. quarter, 25-cent piece, and you look at the size of that thing, you hold it out at your arm's length, and you look at it and say, okay, well, that's about, I see the diameter of that in my vision. I can see that. Well, how far away would you have to take that quarter from your eye to see the quarter at the same apparent size as Alpha Centauri would look in the in the sky? How far away would you have to take that quarter? The answer is astonishing. The problem is you'd have to actually move that quarter away from you 750 miles to be able to see that quarter at the same angular diameter as Alpha Centauri appears in our sky. I mean, that says it all. There's no telescope on the planet that can see a quarter from 750 miles and say, oh, look, that's a quarter, or even that's a coin. There's none. We can't do that, So that's the problem we face, all right? But by doing inference, by doing this inferred data like we do, we can see light curves. So then we can determine how fast something's going around the star. And then we can figure out if it repeats. And then we can say, oh, that's a planet candidate. And then it becomes a planetary candidate. Very, very cool. Now, when the Kepler Space Telescope was crippled, it lost what's called a reaction wheel. Now, the reaction wheels are very sensitive, spinning, basically disks. And what happens is they induce forces by the changing rate of their spin that will make the satellite very subtly move and change direction and pointing direction, okay? So it'll change where it's pointing. Those forces are called torques. And when you have 3 reaction wheels on a satellite, you have the ability to move it any which way you want. Well, the Kepler had 4. It had a spare. It had an extra. But it lost 2 of the 4. And so without that third wheel that was needed to keep it at a certain location, it would drift. And thus the Kepler mission was over. Now, was it because of age? Perhaps. You all know that hard drives in your computer go bad. And basically hard drives are reaction wheels. That's what we're talking about. And reaction wheels are about 15 times larger than a hard drive. Okay, maybe 10. And but they spin like that, and they change the rate of the spin to actually induce a different torque and move that thing a different way. But you need 3, and it only had 2. So for a while, in 2013, the Kepler Space Telescope was crippled, and they announced that the mission was over. But then engineers said, wait a minute, we have an idea. And they started using the sun's force. That is the force of the sun on the actual Kepler Space Telescope body as a third reaction wheel. And they figured out an algorithm to repoint the Kepler. And this became the K2 mission, and it's already been yielding some phenomenal results. So Kepler's back, if for only a little while, until another reaction wheel goes. Okay, but it's very important when you build a satellite to have clean room conditions. And I was working, making these very elaborate models of the Google Earth satellite. Okay, and it was being built out in Arizona, and I would go from Connecticut here to Arizona, once a month, and I'd take all these photographs of the satellite as it was being built in the high bay of this facility. And I had to wear a bunny suit with all the stuff, the rig to keep you static free, and I had a special cord that was coiled, and I had to clip onto a special rail to discharge all of the electricity in my body. And we had to wear this because if we didn't wear this, it's instant. You're instantly fired. You're out of there. And I actually watched that happen. A guy forgot to clip on to the rail. He walked within 3 feet, and that was the threshold. He walked within 3 feet of the Google Earth satellite. And I was up in an observation booth with the program director at the time. And he says, "Who's that guy down there?" And I didn't know because I didn't work there. And the guy there said, "Okay, that's so-and-so." And he called him up and fired him on the spot. And told him why. He said, "You didn't wear your static charge." He goes, "Oh, you're right. Yeah, you're right." Now, you can't afford those mistakes when you're launching tens of millions of dollars worth of satellite into space where you cannot get to it if something goes wrong. So they're very, very paranoid. Okay, very, very paranoid about that. So that's Kepler lasted as long as it did because of that good clean room technique. So and it's been delivering on the missions. It's really good. Again, using planethunters.org, you can now go to that site and use the actual Kepler data, because that's what you're going to look at. And you can start hunting through these data yourself and looking for a light curve. And by the way, if you don't know how, you say, "Well, how do I know how to do that?" Well, guess what? They teach you. There's videos that show you how to do it, and it's wonderful, and they're very, very easy. It's the kind of thing that you could do while just sitting down and streaming a TV show on one screen and finding light curves on the other. I mean, you could literally do this, in your spare time, or even at work when your boss isn't looking. I don't know if that's such a good idea, but anyway, I think that'd be great. So yeah, planethunters.org. And they're not a sponsor of the show. Well, not yet. That'd be interesting if they did. But so this is something that you can all do, and I would like to just take a moment to recap with you and let you know that all the missions we have in space right now, everything we've learned, come from everything I'm telling you comes from my desire to know about astronomy and to be an astronomer. And I'm going to tell you this real quick. It's the final story for the show. I was 9 when I knew I wanted to be an astronomer, and some of you know this, and I might have said it, but I didn't tell you why. When I was 9, I created a space station plan, and I wrote it on notebook paper that I tore out of a spiral-bound notebook. So you had the little frayed paper at the ends, and I furiously wrote this thing, this space station plan, drew pictures. I even figured out how to get rid of waste from humans, and how to get rid of carbon dioxide from breathing. I had an idea about that. And I sent it to NASA, my big space station plan. And I heard nothing for about 2 months. And then I got, when I came home from school one day, my mother said, "Mark, you got a big box here in the living room from NASA." I went, "What?" And I went to the box, and it was a big box from NASA. And I was like, "Oh, wow." And I opened it up. It was filled to the top with cloth, mission patches, books, brochures, even models of the rockets at the time. And right on top of all of it was a manila folder with my space station plan, with a little note on it that said, "Excellent. Check out the inside. I wrote some notes for you." And I got a letter from NASA from a specific scientist. And I read through my plan, and in every page, the scientist wrote, "Good idea, great idea, keep up the good work, that's a good idea, we might use that," and that kind of thing. And as it turned out, this guy is now the head of all robotic space missions to our solar system, and his name is Gentry Lee. And he works at JPL. He's an unassuming guy, but he is one of the greats. And Gentry Lee is the reason that I'm an astronomer today, because of that space box. And I labeled it Space Box, and I had it for years and years, and I just loved digging through that box. In fact, about 6 months to 10 months in, I found things that I had missed the first few times I was digging through it. Okay, unbelievable. So I would dedicate this show, and of course all of our planetary discussion, to Gentry Lee at JPL. That man is my hero, and I just thought I'd share it with all of you. Now, I don't know if there's any quick questions. I've only got a minute left, Amanda.
We only have a minute left. We did. Charles wanted to know how much of the sky has been searched for planets.
Well, there's different. That's a very good question. There's different. There's different programs. The arm's length fist is the arm's length fist size is the size of the Kepler Space Telescope view, but there's other programs like the CoROT that actually looked elsewhere at different spots, and there's other missions like the Gemini telescope that have looked at other spots. As far as a percentage, I ain't sure, guys. I'm not sure what the exact percentage of the sky is that we've searched. But I can say this: it's extremely small relative to the amount. It's like looking out an airplane window. You don't see much of anything else. You don't see everything else around you. You see a little narrow view. But I have to say this: I want to thank you for joining us for this first commercial-free show. And I didn't get a break at all, and I'm okay with that. So if we can do this again, I will. I just want to remind you. Please stop by our store at fxmodels.com. Go to the FX Models Planetary Replicas site on Facebook and check out our store. Use the special code ST15, ST15 to get $15 off at any time. And on behalf of Amanda, thank you, Amanda, for joining me.
Thank you.
And I want to thank all of you for listening. And you guys have a great night. And remember, keep looking up.